Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. Tonight, I'm doing something I very rarely do. I am reshooting a video that I had been working on. Most of the time, when I make a video, it's one take, no dubs, and that's what you get. But I had worked on a topic recently, but some stuff happened that made me want to revisit it and tweak it a bit before I actually rolled it out to YouTube. What happened to make me revisit it is that on a recent episode of Heavy Metallurgy, Marty and I had Darcy and Metal Mickey on to talk about Testament, but we had a few interesting kind of side tangents that came up. And they actually kind of ran pretty close to the topic I had already been basically making a video for. So I thought it actually would be nice to incorporate some of that discussion into the video I was getting ready to release. So I'm just going to redo it to get those points in. I think the original video probably rambled a little bit too much anyway. And I think with the new insights from Darcy and Mike and Marty, I can make this a little more focused. So, what the actual topic is bad habits I have gotten into as a heavy metal fan. Now, to be clear, I think a lot of people, many people have probably gotten into these same bad habits, but I'm going to very much couch this in terms of, what mistakes I have made and what I'm trying to do to maybe, fix those bad habits or get them a little bit under control. Maybe you see some of this in yourself when you listen to it. Maybe you don't. Doesn't matter. I'm not doing this to be judgy. I'm not saying these are, horrible things that are going to crush anybody's soul or anything. It's just sort of, habits, patterns I noticed that I've gotten into, some of them recently, some of them over much longer periods of time. And there are things that, yeah, I'm trying to make some adjustments on. Um, the first one that comes up is constantly trying to figure out, should a band change and have every album be different, or should bands try to aim for consistency? I feel like this is a topic that's come up a lot in recent years because there are a lot of veteran bands that have been putting out some consistently good albums over the past, say, 5 to 10 years. But at the same time, they're playing it very safe on a lot of those albums. They're just kind of sticking to what they know, kind of giving the crowd what they want, not really venturing out of their box whatsoever. This came up in the Testament discussion with, well, pretty much every album Testament has made since 2008. So that's about 16 years worth of Testament now, which is 4 albums. It's like, Testament's made several good albums in that span of time. Some people will like them more than others, and that's okay. But the bottom line is, Testament went back to their old formula around 2008. They had tried some different things through the 90s. They took a hiatus for several years in the early 2000s, and then when they came back to, like, you know what, let's just go back and make very straightforward, kind of classical Bay Area thrash type albums, because that's what we're known for. That's what people seem to want. So let's do that. They've done it, and they've done it well. But, this can, again, cause an issue. Some people hear these albums and they enjoy them, and that's great. But some people hear them and they get kind of bored with them. Like, oh, okay, that one sounds a lot like the last 3 albums. So it's been 16 years and you're just kind of treading water. You're stuck in a rut. You're doing the same thing, whatever way you want to phrase it. And I definitely do this to bands. I will definitely hear these albums and be like, oh, that's a decent enough album, but man, it's just more of the same. And I feel like I get kind of tired or bored with those things. Is this a bad habit in itself? Not necessarily, but it's definitely worth remembering that sometimes we put these bands in a no-win situation. Testament, as I said, tried some different things during the 1990s, especially on the Demonic album, to a lesser extent on Low, maybe a little bit on The Gathering. And a lot of people gave them endless tons of crap for that. Like, oh, that doesn't sound like Testament at all. Oh, that's a horrible album. Oh, that sucks. Oh, why don't you just play more old school thrash like you're supposed to, quote unquote? Well, then they start doing that. Say, okay, we'll make a bunch of more old school thrash albums. And then the tune becomes, oh, well, geez, that album sounds just like all the others. It's fine, but wow, can't you do anything different? And what's a band supposed to do? Yeah, this is very much why you hear bands make comments like, hey, we're just going to make music to please ourselves. Those kind of statements can sound very self centered and pretentious sometimes, but I think, I need to remember that, well, they almost have to do it that way because you can never please everybody. There will always be some diehard fans who love anything you do. There'll always be that contingent of old school fans who love it as long as you stick to that paradigm they know and love. And there'll always be some people that like it when you go off and do something quirky and weird and kind of, mix it up and catch them off guard and surprise them. You're never going to please all those groups at the same time. So you probably shouldn't even try to. You should figure out what's going to work well for you and do that. Hey, for Testament, at this point in their career, if it suits them to make, very good, if somewhat, interchangeable thrash metal albums, sure, go for it. There's not a ton of bands still doing thrash this well. So maybe, I should complain less about it, enjoy it more. And another thing I can always remember too is I don't have to buy these if I don't want to. Just another act in very much the same vein. Jagdpanzer has that same kind of situation. No one's going to make me buy the new Jagdpanzer if I just feel like I've heard Jagdpanzer do Jagdpanzer enough times. I don't have to pick up the new one. And I guess maybe that's the point here. Something that I need to remember is it's quite okay to say that that's a good album, but I just don't need it because I have so many other albums that sound kind of like it. I am not a completist. Other people are. If you're a completist and you feel like that's how you collect, that is okay. There's not a right or wrong way to collect. We all do it a little different. If you're someone who just feels like, yes, I must have every Panzer album, even the ones I'm not that keen on, okay, you do you. I'm not a completist for most bands. There's very few that I really make a point to try to get everything by. So yeah, maybe I just need to remember that sometimes. Be like, hey, even if I find this cheap in a used bin or something, if I have enough Jagdpanzer, I don't really have to buy it, even though it's a good album. Even though I might play it once in a blue moon, maybe it's just not something I need to own, and that's okay. So that's one thing I think I need to be more mindful of is if I'm saying these bands are just making the same album over and over, there may be, a strong element of truth to that. There's probably a reason the bands are doing that, whether it's, to make sure they're financially secure or because they simply get less crap from fans by doing that than trying to reinvent the wheel. And again, for older veteran acts, it's probably hard to go out and do something completely different at this stage. They're used to one thing. There may not be anything they want to explore, and that's okay. Well, just remember too, when we call for bands to do things different, sometimes they do things different. And again, we don't always like that. Personally, I liked it when Paradise Lost, went in this more electronic vein. But man, that didn't work out well for a lot of their fans. And eventually, they kind of went back to a much heavier sound. And some people are missing this style, and other people are liking what they do now. And, again, you just can't please everyone. Okay, on to second, sort of issue I have been messing up on at times. Going back through last year's, finances and stuff, tax season's finally over. Thank God for that. I noticed that, I spend too much money on metal stuff. This becomes a bit of an issue. Part of the issue is, it can creep up on you because a lot of times you're just buying things, in small increments like this. It's a couple of used, this is, 2 used CDs, or it's 1 brand new CD release. It doesn't seem like that much. Little here, little there. But yeah, when I stop, do the math and kind of add up, it's like, okay, how much did I spend last year on records? Yeah, I can't pin it down to an exact number, but I could get a ballpark estimate. And it was like, I am not happy with that number. That is too much, in my opinion. And again, the number would be different for everybody. based on income, how much you can afford to spend, how much you want to spend, how many other things you've got, financial obligations, all that kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. We all know personal finances, more or less. But yeah, I look at the number from last year and just like, I'm not comfortable with how much I spent. I should not have spent that much. And I want to be clear here. This is not buyer's remorse. I'm not thinking like, oh yeah, I bought that record for $40 and wow, I wish I hadn't bought that record for $40. Again, purchase to purchase to purchase on a just time by time basis. Most of the stuff I bought, I liked. It turned out pretty well. So it's not like a lot of buyer's remorse issue here. It's more just looking back and realizing like, yeah, it never seemed like that much at the time, but when you add it up, month after month over the course of a year or 6 months, whatever time frame you're looking at, it starts to pile up a lot more than you would have guessed. And you start realizing, yeah, that's money I could have spent on other things, or money that I could have saved for a rainy day, for an emergency that comes up, for something else that maybe I would rather have had than yet another handful of used CDs or another order from Discogs. That maybe I passed on buying this other thing because I felt like I didn't have the money for it. If I hadn't bought all these little things over the past 4 months beforehand, well, maybe I could have bought the thing I would have rather had. So being a little more mindful with how much I'm spending and being kind of keeping better tabs on how much that accumulates over time, something I need to do a little bit better on. And I'm working on it this year. I'm not saying at all I'm never going to buy anything. I'm not saying that there will probably could be some expensive purchases or piles of stuff that show up at times. But I definitely want to try to space out purchases more and really think to myself, like, do I need that? Am I likely to enjoy that? Is this a good price for that? Do I have too much stuff already laying here to listen to that I haven't got around to yet? That maybe this just isn't the right time to buy more stuff too. So that's a mistake I think I've made a little bit too much recently. And so I'm going to try to do that. And again, to be very clear, it's not a case of buyer's remorse. I've enjoyed a lot of the records I've bought, but I haven't got to enjoy them as much as I want to. And that kind of leads into my third point. Talking with Mike and Darcy and Marty and other people, something that tends to come up is we talk about how much we listened to albums, quote unquote, back in the day when we were teenagers, kind of first getting into heavy metal and stuff like that. That we'd sit and play these albums a ton. And again, there are particular reasons for that. We had limited amounts of this, much more so than we do today. So we, whenever we bought an album, it was a commitment, and we were going to try to make that relationship work, even if the album didn't really impress us, or as soon as we got it home. We had limited opportunities to go buy stuff. This was true especially for folks like myself who lived in very rural areas. We got out to a big city with a record store at most once a month, probably more like once every 6 weeks. I don't know for sure, but yeah. And that was a lot compared to some of my friends who might not get out nearly even that much. So yeah, we bought a smaller number of albums and we played them a lot more. And that's why when we look back, we feel like we know those albums by heart. We have very strong nostalgia for them. There's a lot of sentimental attachment for them. And it's because we spent a lot of time with them. Just one example of this I pulled off the shelf, for me was Metallica's Master of Puppets. When I first got that, yes, I played it and played it and played it and played it. Even by the time I was graduating high school, I was already a little burned out on this album, not because it was bad. It's an incredible album. I simply was getting burned out on it because I'd already played it so much. I felt like I don't really need to put it in rotation much anymore. Now compare that to something, that I've bought, in the past 6 months or so. One example I just pulled off the shelf, Fer-de-Lance, the Hyperborean. This is a really good record. I liked it a lot. What does it sound like? It's a traditional power metal-y thing with some folky elements. Even though I know I like this, I couldn't name, if I wasn't looking at the back of the CD right now, I couldn't name a single song off this album. And I kind of struggled to even explain what their general sound is, what makes them unique, because they have a relatively unique sound compared to a lot of other bands. Why don't I know this album as well as I know something like this? It's not just the fact that I've had this for 35 years. It's that when I got this record, I played it a handful of times, recognized, okay, it has some unique elements, and I like what they're doing here. But then it got put on the shelf, and I just moved on to something else. Listening habits and buying habits have changed a lot. We tend to buy stuff much more frequently, and we spend less time with any given album than we used to. And as such, we never give ourselves the connection to make those connections. And again, keeping this more in terms of myself, I haven't really given myself a chance to have a stronger connection to something like this Fer-de-Lance album. How could it? I've probably played it less than 6 times. I would guess I've played it, 5 is often a number I sort of aim for. But yeah, I've given it 5 spins. That's not enough to really, know it inside and out. So how could I have a connection? So why would it be on the same kind of, tier as something like this? Well, it can't. And I feel like I want to get back more to the situation I had in these days, where there was a smaller amount of music coming in the door, but I got to spend more time with those records so that I understand them better, so that they make more sense to me, so that I can articulate them much better from memory and not just have to look at a spreadsheet to make notes about it, or go back and replay and be like, oh yeah, okay, now I remember this one. I don't want to just buy them, put them on the shelf, within a week and forget that I even bought them. That's kind of embarrassing in a way for me. I did a video recently, or was talking to someone about Immortals Blizzard Beasts. I forgot I owned a copy of it. I bought it, I played it probably twice and put it on the shelf. Now I'd heard that album, here and there over time. But yeah, I had never given it, a really deep listen to the point that I forgot I had it. And this isn't necessarily a new thing. Again, we all sometimes buy metal in bigger batches that we shouldn't. In the past few months, I've ordered like 13 CDs from Nameless Grave when they had their big 50% sale. I got like 13, 14 CDs from a Discog vendor when they were doing a big sale. And I got about a dozen things at a record show also. And so again, it's not a buyer's remorse issue, but it's like, just take those 3 purchases from 2024. And let's just say that's all I've got. That's already at least 36 CDs, a few vinyl, but yeah, 36 albums that I've purchased this year. Well, that if I just stopped there and had bought nothing else, and I buy nothing else for the rest of 2024, that's already 36 purchases, 36 albums bought in 2024. That's an average of 1 new album every 10 days. That's already a pretty decent chunk of music for a year, if you're going to really try to pay attention to them and give them a longer time span to spend and get used to them, which is something I'd like to get back to. But yeah, things tend to bottleneck, and then you either just never play them or you push through them really fast. I tend to push through them really fast. That's a bad habit I've gotten into that I want to kind of get out of. And it's an old problem, just to highlight it. Even in high school, I only listened to metal for a few years at that point. But I distinctly remember, I guess I should say vaguely, because I'm a little fuzzy on the dates. I believe it was like, November 91, but it could have been 90, maybe it was October, whatever. But there was a weekend there where I was on a marching band field trip. And when we stopped at a shopping mall to eat and stuff, everyone, of course, nobody ate. We all ran to the record store. Yeah, I got a copy of Annihilator's Never Neverland on tape. Really wanted that. Somebody else had it at high school. I liked the album a lot, so I bought that. One of the other kids pointed out to me that there's a band called Suicidal Tendencies, and the store had some of their tapes on sale for only like $5. And so we agreed he'd buy one and I'd buy the other. I ended up getting How Will I Laugh Tomorrow. But this way, we could each hear the other one. He got Feel Like Shit Deja Vu. So I got two tapes, that Saturday on the marching band field trip. And then the next day on Sunday, going to a record show with my dad, I ended up getting a vinyl copy of the first LA Guns album, which I'd heard some songs from and kind of liked. And so, that one weekend, I got 3 records. But it was also kind of late fall of that year. Again, I'm thinking it was in a November timeframe, which meant Christmas was just a few weeks away. And I got a handful of, cassettes and stuff for Christmas. I don't remember what titles I got. But right there already, even in high school, there was this bottleneck on this occasion where 3 things came in the door at the same time. Well, I spent a lot of time with the Annihilator because that's the one I wanted. The Suicidal Tendencies, it took a long time for me to kind of get used to that one because I didn't have time to play it because I was playing Annihilator. The LA Guns took even longer to get into because it was a LP. I could only play it on the turntable, so I couldn't put in my Walkman and wander around with it. And then here came some stuff for Christmas that just kind of bottlenecked again. And I let those bottlenecks happen too often, and that's something that I want to try to improve on. So here lately, I've been trying to space out purchases a little bit more and keep them to smaller amounts. A good example of how to do this is when I want a particular thing on Discogs, is just find the copy I want and don't bother looking at the seller's other items. Or if I do, glance at them quickly, but unless there's an outstanding album at a great cheap price, just buy the one thing that I want. And when things show up, give them more time and more spins. A couple of quick examples of this approach. And I got this in one of the piles of stuff I bought. And see, I don't even remember. Did this come from the Nameless Grave sale or did it come from the Discog sale? I think it came from the Nameless Grave sale, but I wouldn't swear to it. Don't even remember. What I do remember, though, is that I decided, this is going to be the point where I'm going to start paying more attention to some things. Because some people whose opinions I put a lot of stock in had highly recommended this. Simon at Explosive Action liked this one a lot. Kellen at Killing for Company liked this one a lot. Jeff and Hunter over at Radical Research podcast liked this one a lot. So I'm like, I should check that out. And when I check it out, I need to give it more attention. I don't need to spin it 3 or 4 times, come up with a quick opinion, and move on. So yeah, I've been playing this for several weeks now. It's probably gotten, I would guess, around maybe 20 spins, 24, in that neighborhood. And as such, yes, I'm a lot more familiar with this than I am most of the other things I have purchased this year. It helps that I ended up liking it, so didn't mind spinning as much. But yeah, it is a kind of strange, unique album. It's not something I played once and was instantly in love with, but it was good enough to like, yeah, that's interesting. I need to investigate it further, but I need to give it the time, and I have. And so yeah, now, can I hum along to every song? Do I remember exactly what happens 3 minutes and 46 seconds into track 6? No. But do I remember more about, more of the songs than, say, something like that Fer-de-Lance I was showing earlier? The Fer-de-Lance I couldn't have named a song from. I could probably name most of the songs on this album without looking at the CD. And for a lot of them, I can remember distinct parts and passages, things that I like about them that make them stand out. It's a really cool album, and I'm glad I've taken the time to get used to it. One more example where I've been trying to give things, more time, bring fewer things in the door, give each of them a lot more attention. Picked up a copy of Rush's Moving Pictures. I've had this in the past, never really gave it a ton of attention. Rush is just not my band. I just, as Hunter and Jeff like to say at Radical Research, I don't quite know how to appreciate Rush. They're just not quite the band for me. But this is considered a watershed album by a lot of people. it does have, it had Limelight on it, which is a song I've always liked. It's one of my favorites by them. And, this showed up at a bookstore used for, $6. So it's like, yeah, okay, I will give it another chance, but this time I'm actually going to give it a real chance. So yeah, I've played this for a couple of weeks and paying attention to it, not just making it background music, which is something else I've noticed. Well, I'll come back to that in a minute. Try to remember to. But yeah, so now having played this a lot, at least a dozen spins in the past couple weeks, I've got a better feel for what I like and don't like. For example, I've realized I really like the song Vital Signs, the last one on the album. It has that kind of reggae-ish structure to it, but I think it works really well. I had never noticed that song on this album before. Yeah, Limelight is a personal favorite in their catalog. Some of the other songs aren't bad. Witch Hunt, got, this moodier atmosphere, which now I'm more attuned to. That song had never really left an impression before. And sometimes things don't work out, but I understand more why. A good example of this is I kind of understand now why I don't like the song Red Barchetta. And okay, yes, that's heretical to some people. A lot of folks love that song. That's cool. I'm not going to harsh on anybody for liking it. But I figured out why I don't like it. And it actually helped me figure out something else about why I have trouble with Rush. Red Barchetta is this sci-fi, based on a sci-fi story about, someone having a car when there's laws against having cars. And so they take this car out on the road and then they get chased around by these hover cars and barely escape and all that. So it's this kind of, action adventure little sci-fi story. But the music and the vocals don't really convey much excitement or action. There's not much tension or anything. When the chase is going on, it's not like the structure of the song changes to really pick up the pace. Geddy Lee's not changing his vocal delivery to make it feel like, there's, tension in trying to escape and elude the hover cars. And I think that's an issue I have with, other Rush material is that, I don't get the emotional connection that, it comes off, it has a little bit of that, prog stereotype of, being a little maybe, too self-involved, technical, and not delivering the emotional oomph, which, is something I tend to like more in music. It often says like, I'm not nuts about Geddy Lee's vocals, but he's not a bad vocalist, which always feels a little bit, it's like, well, do you like him or not? I think now I'm starting to see like maybe that's why I'm not huge on Geddy Lee. It's not that I think he's a technically bad singer or anything like that, but it's that he doesn't necessarily infuse the emotion into the song like Red Barchetta that I think the song needed for me personally to, maybe have the song click in my brain at least. So yeah, that song doesn't work for me. Sorry, world, it's just not my song. But at least now I know more about why it's not my song and maybe why Rush doesn't quite connect for me the way it does for so many fans. All right. Last thing I mentioned, I said there's one other thing that occurred to me there. Seeing the Rush CD kind of jogged my memory. The last bad habit I've gotten into that I'm trying to get out of is just putting music on for background music's sake. I spend a lot of time grading papers and building lectures and stuff like that. It's nice to have music on in the background. But I've noticed that means very often I'm paying very little attention to the music. So I might play an album 5 times and really not know much about it at the end of the day because my focus is over here on the work I'm doing. So what I'm trying to do to fix that issue with myself is thinking more carefully about what albums I play and when. Like with Stargazer and Rush, I have not been playing these while working. I've been playing these either during my commute when I can focus a little bit more on the music I'm hearing, or just in the evening once the work is done. If I've got an extra hour, it's like, okay, let's sit down and play one of those when I can pay more attention to it. Meanwhile, what I've realized is that when I'm working on other things where my attention is going to be focused on that other item, that's the time to, I can still play background music, but that's the time to break out maybe like some old favorites. That's the time to go back and break out. Oh, it was here somewhere. That's the time to go back and play Master of Puppets. This works quite well as background music. I don't need to sit and absorb and analyze and process Master of Puppets. I can put that on the background, hear it, be enjoying it, but still have my attention where it needs to be focused at the time. Whereas, with something new like Fer-de-Lance right now, I shouldn't play as background music. That's not going to help me understand the record. This needs to be in the commute pile or in the play it in the evening when I'm kind of winding down for the day pile. That's where I think I can get more connected with these albums and understand them better, instead of, just having them playing back here when I'm barely even noticing the music is on sometimes. So those are some issues and habits with my listening experience that I've noticed that I'm going to work on changing. So now let's wrap this up and let's talk metal in the comments down below. Do you notice yourself having any of these patterns or other issues that you've kind of noticed? Is like, I'm not really happy with the way that's going right now, the way I'm approaching music, whether it's financially or how you're playing it, when you're playing it, where you're playing it. You feel like, I should make some changes there. And how are you going to try to change them? You certainly don't have to do it the way I am. That's not going to work for everybody. These may not work for me. And to be clear, there's going to be times where, yes, I find a good sale and stuff, and I still buy, 10 CDs at once because there's some really good titles there, and it's, a good opportunity. It's going to happen from time to time, but I'm just trying to make sure those times happen less frequently. I space them out and enjoy the music more. But yeah, if you've got other ideas, approaches, or similar issues and topics that you have, and leave a comment below and folks can discuss them. And what do you think about the whole issue of bands being consistent versus trying to constantly evolve? I feel like at the end of the day, everybody approaches these bands a little bit different. What I want out of Testament's probably not the same as what other people want out of Testament. But, is there something in general that you like? Do you like a band to reinvent themselves all the time? Do you want certain bands to just be that security blanket and give you the same experience album after album? Leave a comment. We'll talk about it there. But for now, I've got to wrap this up. So until next time, everybody take care. And as always, keep banging your head.